It's nice to see everybody. Thanks for taking a minute after work today. What I'm Eric Grigsby. I'm a physician and the founder and currently lead our company here in Napa called Neurovations. And Neurovations is as you can see, is patient care and innovation company. And we have a clinic called Napa Pain Institute, which has been here in Napa for 32 years, and we've taken it during that time taken care of patients with chronic pain of all kinds, including pain in the head and migraine and many other challenges. And a little bit about our company before we get too far along. We currently have several parts of Neurovations. One is Napa Pain Institute, as I mentioned, which is a typical outpatient clinic in its organization, but we think it's very unusual in the breadth and the longevity of the kind of care that we've been able to provide for patients for a long time. Alongside the clinic, we have a surgery center where we do a number of procedures, including the kind of procedure that's going to be involved in the Shiratronics migraine study. We also have a clinical laboratory, which we use for various diagnostic tools. We do safe prescribing monitoring for our patients in the opioid world and other medications that we want to make sure are being taken safely and carefully. And we also did almost all the COVID testing for Napa County back in the COVID days that we can all remember, mostly still remember. And we also have a couple of unusual parts of our business for a community practice. We have an education business where we have had a number of meetings and educational programs over the years for clinicians in pain. And we also have a very large grant from the National Institute of Health to coordinate all of the researchers in the United States who are involved in the study of pain, either basic science or preclinical animal studies or studies in human beings like Shiratronics. We have a mission to coordinate all of the researchers in the U.S. and try to help them be more productive through collaboration and coordination and education information exchange. And very importantly, we have a clinical research business where we work with companies who are involved in research on pain and neurologic disease. And so clinical research means that the organization that's sponsoring the study is studying it in people, in actual human patients. And that means that it's gone through a lot of development and that the FDA has approved the study. And then there is a tremendous amount of oversight, regulatory oversight, and make sure that we're doing things the right way scientifically and in the best interest of our patients. And so we have a busy clinical research business. We have 8 or 10 studies going at any one time, and we've been doing this for 30 years or so. And one of the biggest challenges we've had in our field is the lack of tools to use for patients that have chronic pain in the head and chronic migraine. And for those of you that are either patients who struggle with headache and migraine, you know these issues very well, that it's a family challenge, it's a social challenge, it's an economic challenge. And again, we've had a limited number of tools to use for patients who struggle with pain in the head. And the last 10 years or so, last decade, we've had a couple of wins in the medication world, but we still have a large number of patients that don't get adequate relief from the medications that we use. And so we've been looking for many years for an idea that's interventional and is unlikely to have side effects like the oral medicines, and that is liable to have high efficacy. And so this little treatment continuum, which is what we'd call it, you can see for patients that have episodic migraine, it's pretty straightforward. You know, a lot of our patients have migraine that's of moderate severity and frequency, and so they can manage with a few hours of trouble with over-the-counter drugs. We've had some wins, as I mentioned, with prescription drugs in the past several years. And there are a number of medical device solutions that have been proposed, some of which are external stimulation devices with a little bit of electricity, like a TENS unit. You may be familiar with that, where we can stimulate various nerves that we know are involved in the pathophysiology or the nature of migraine. And then we also have some more interventional things. We do Botox injections. You might have heard of that. Many of our migraine patients have had Botox injections, which do help. The data is pretty strong, but the most commonly used therapy for chronic migraine still remains just get out of the light and don't have any stimulation and just try to bear with it until the thing goes away. And we just feel like there's an unmet need here. And so for a lot of years, those of us that have been in the interventional pain world, which has been my specialty, have looked to this concept of so-called neuromodulation. And modulation simply means to alter or modify, and hopefully in a beneficial way. And the field of neuromodulation is quite old, but in the last 15 years, it's accelerated really rapidly. And it mostly involves electrical stimulation of part of the nervous system. And as you recall, the nervous system is made up of this coordinating center up here that by this time of day, some of our coordinating centers are a little bit beat. But we have a coordinating center, which is, of course, the brain and the brainstem. And then we have a sort of a conduit, a highway for information which we call the spinal cord. And then we have peripheral nerves, and those are the nerves in the arms and legs. And in the past 15 years, there's been a tremendous explosion of understanding and technical development of how to get stimulation to the various nerves and neurologic structures of the body in a kind of a safe and simple way. And interestingly, for a long time, we in the field have known that electrical stimulation or a signal, it's not like plugging your finger into a light socket, but it's a certain specific type of electrical signal that we put on the nerves. We've known for a long time that stimulation of the occipital nerves, which are the nerves behind the head, can be effective in treating migraine. There have been 3 very high-level studies that have demonstrated the efficacy, that is, that demonstrated the effectiveness of this treatment for patients with pain. And unfortunately, the technical devices that we had to use were meant to be used for other things like spinal cord stimulation. And up until now, we've never had a specially made device that's intended to be used for treatment of migraine. And so we had a lot of trouble, like technical trouble, like the little electrodes would get out of place, which doesn't injure anybody, but it means that it doesn't work very well. So we've had a lot of struggles with the technical part. And the company that's sponsoring this clinical trial, called Shiratronics, has spent a lot of time and with good engineering and development to put together a specially made set of electrodes or little tiny wires, along with a little computer chip and a battery and a way to communicate with the outside world in such a way that we can really specifically deliver tiny bits of electricity to a nerve right above the eye and to another nerve on the back of the head. And we do this on both sides. And I'll tell you a little bit about this study as we go forward here. The history of neuromodulation is a long one. The first pacemaker, a pacemaker is a type of neuromodulation in its way. It just stimulates the nervous system in the heart to make it beat well. And there are a number, you can see in the history there are a number of other, I would say big successes in neurostimulation over the years, including, and you see in the 1960s there, it talks about deep brain stimulation, where there's a small electrode placed actually inside the noggin, down deep in the brain under, direct MRI guidance in the operating room for things like Parkinson's disease. It's been one of those really remarkable things that stops the Parkinson's tremor, just almost instantly when it's turned on. And we've used spinal cord stimulation, as I mentioned, and vagal nerve stimulation. There's so much sort of an explosion of opportunity and understanding of how to affect the nervous system in a positive way. And one of the things that we do here at Nervations is transcranial magnetic stimulation. So we put a big magnet on the noggin, which is FDA approved for depression. And it's very, very effective and incredibly safe and helpful. So this particular study that's sponsored by Shiratronics called a Relieve CM2 study. It's designed to demonstrate the safety and the effectiveness of this specially made device that goes ultimately under the skin of the scalp. It doesn't actually go down inside your brain, through the through the through the skull or the bony plates under your skull. It just goes under the skin that stimulates these nerves. But this study is intended to try to show the safety and the effectiveness of this type of neurostimulation therapy for patients with chronic migraine. The beauty of the thing is it's in the long run, it's a very small implant. You can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, I'll be honest, but I'm circling a small little gadget that's a little bit bigger than your thumb, maybe in terms of width and not quite as long as your thumb, but it has a little battery and a computer chip and a little antenna to communicate with the outside world and to receive energy to recharge the thing. And so it's made in a way that's small enough to be placed under the skin of the scalp, under your hair, so it's very unobtrusive, and it doesn't use any drugs at all, so there's no need to get things refilled and do the pharmacy chase and all those things and no side effects. And it can run 24/7, so there's no up and down like taking a pill, having it be absorbed, having its effectiveness and then wear off and so on. So this can run 24/7. This has always been a great advantage of neurostimulation as opposed to pharmacologic therapies like medication therapies, is that the neurostimulation, the energy can be just continuous 24/7. And we also have in this study there's also a patient controlled feature, so the patients can have a little gadget in your hand to keep in your pocket or your purse. It can change the energy delivery in a favorable way. And of course we work with the company guys to make sure that that's set up in a way that is good and easy to manage for the patient. There's a lot we don't know about the origin of migraines, but we do know that it's believed to start in a part of the brainstem called the cervicotrigeminal region. And we know that we can get energy into that region directly, but it's really difficult. In other words, it's kind of under the brain. So we can get energy there externally, which is the goal, by using this supraorbital nerve, this nerve right here that goes there. We put energy here, and we use this nerve to take the energy where it needs to go. And we do the same with the occipital nerve on the back of the head. We stimulate that nerve, and it takes the energy down inside the brain where we think that migraines begin. And so the patients with migraine already knew this because they have pain. When you get a migraine, they have pain that's here and also on the back of the head, and many times in a coronal way over the entire head. But so this is intended, as I just said, just to summarize, to use these external nerves above the eye and on the back of the head as a delivery conduit to get a little bit of electrical energy to the site of origin of the migraine headache inside the brain. And so we do that by placing a small little electrode on the supraorbital nerve that's called right here, and one over here, and one on the back on this side, and one on the back on the other side. And you can see that basically the design of that here, where this is the battery that I mentioned to you, battery in the little computer chip that's inside there. And there's one electrode that's attached to it that goes back and sits over the occipital. This is called the occipital nerve. And there's another little electrode that goes in the front and goes around the side of the head there, right over the eye, and it stimulates the supraorbital nerve. And then one of those systems goes on each side. And so most people are think, well, this is electricity, so what does it feel like? I'm not that excited to have electricity on my noggin, but as I mentioned before, this is not like plugging your finger into a light socket. This is highly organized, very specific way to deliver an impulse, really, you would say, rather than electricity, or a little bit of energy, an energy wave rather than electricity. And what people say is it feels like there's a buzzing or a tingling sensation, maybe a vibratory feeling. And some people don't feel anything at all. We can program it in such a way that the energy is enough to get the headache suppressed, but patients actually have no feeling of it. And whether you feel it or you don't feel it is something that we can work on as during the course of the study. But either have an impact, either feeling it or not feeling it has an impact. It still has a positive impact on your headache. So this business of a clinical study. So what's the nature of a clinical study? So a clinical study is a requirement according to the United States Food and Drug Administration and the analogous organizations in basically every developed country in the world, which is intended to put structure and organization and safety and scientific rigor around the development of new therapies and diagnostic things, both drugs and devices and biologics and stem cells. Everybody's talking about and various other things. So they have to be studied under a trial in a clinical study that's FDA approved. And there are some ethical foundations of clinical studies. And one is that it's completely voluntary for a patient to be in a study. And once a patient enters a study, there's no obligation if you decide you can't or don't want to participate, continue to participate. There's no requirement for the patient to continue to participate. The patient has 100% autonomy and agency about whether or not they participate in a trial or continue in the trial. And that's just the nature of clinical research in the United States. And anything other than that is just would not be acceptable. In this situation, the study sponsor covers all of the costs of this strategy, of this treatment. And the nature of clinical studies is that we help your participation as a patient helps us develop these new ideas. And I've done this for a long time. I've been a PI, a principal investigator, so-called, for decades on a large number of clinical studies, and helped develop a lot of things in our field. And we have a lot of patients who are just eager, frankly, to be involved and help create a therapy for a problem that, yes, they've struggled with, but they also feel good about helping develop new things that can help other people as well. And in fact, it's kind of hard to do that in society. This is a way to have a very, very meaningful impact on the development of new therapies, is to participate in a study. And again, this particular study is to study and to attempt to demonstrate the safety and effectiveness of this Sheeratronics device on the treatment of migraines. I think I went backwards there, so I'm going to go frontwards now. So this particular study involves a couple of phases. It involves one phase, which is just an assessment of whether the patient is acceptable for the study. And being acceptable doesn't have anything to do with how good a person you are or anything like that. It has to do with sort of how many headache days you have in a month, and what severity and what other medications do you take, and some issues around other related medical conditions. But there's a 28-day sort of screening process. It's basically a diary that we'll coordinate with you. And Luana is our clinical research coordinator on point for this study. And she will help you each day of the 28 days to document whether or not you had a headache, some features of the headache, medications you might have needed to take because of the headache, and any other change in your medical condition. So that's the first phase, is a 28-day just diary documentation of how you're doing and how the headache is, how frequent it happens, and so on. And then if you meet the sort of requirements of the study, the objective requirements of the study in terms of the type and frequency and severity of the headache, then if you choose to, you can go ahead and have the trial phase, so-called. And the trial is an opportunity for patients, or potential, we say subjects in the clinical research world, but just patients are the same as subjects, we'll say for the purpose of this discussion. The trial phase involves placement of these tiny little wires just through the skin and just over the eye on both sides, and then a couple on the back. And the wires, these tiny little wires, are only about 1.5 millimeters across, so they're very small. They come out and they go behind your ear and really external, right? So they're all just outside with a little Band-Aid over them. And then we attach them to a little external battery. And so our subjects have the opportunity to have this stimulation pattern that we would eventually deliver through the implanted device. You have a chance to feel that for about a week. And of course, we ask you to document things, how you feel, how much headache was relieved, if any, how many headache days you had, and so on. And if that's successful, and then we go to the implant phase, which is placing the device. We have to remove the electrodes and wait a couple of weeks or so. And then we can place the device, the new electrodes, the little wires that are attached now to the implanted battery and little computer chip that I mentioned before. And that involves the first trial phase doesn't involve any surgery, actually just involves placing these with a needle through the skin. The second involves making two small incisions on the back of the patient's noggin, so big enough to put this little battery in, and then, gently placing the electrodes in the place that they need to be. And then after the implant, it takes a couple of weeks or so to place the device and have you heal up, have the patients heal up and feel good. And then we turn on the therapy, and the idea is we leave it on, running 24/7, and then we charge it with this external device. This individual's wearing this sort of a little looks like to me it looks like a headset with a microphone and earphones or something like that. But it basically just goes on your head and then plugs into the wall or plugs into a battery and provides energy to recharge the gadget. And we need to do that about a couple hours at the most a week in order to have continuous enough power for continuous use of this device all the other days and hours of the week. So in the study, the way studies are, there are always things we look at. And so in this study is organized to have a high dose group and a low dose group. So some people will get more energy than others in the study, and that's part of what we're trying to assess. And part of the statistical piece of clinical research is to make sure that we have those things blinded and that we have two different groups so we can compare them. So that's the way that part works. I know there may be some questions about all this, and but I'll finish up a little bit on the trial system. I told you that the procedure takes a little less than an hour, I think. It's an outpatient thing, and the electrodes are placed under the skin, basically with just a needle and a lot of local anesthesia and a lot of sedation, or under general anesthesia if the patient prefers to have it that way. They're left in for 6 to 10 days, probably closer to 6. The permanent system, the surgery takes a little bit longer because we have to put the battery in, but it is also generally an outpatient type procedure. It's a little bit sore for a few days, like most minor surgeries are. And again, we don't operate on the bone of the head. It's just an incision on the skin and a little bit of make a little room sufficient to hold the battery. I'm happy to answer questions about that at a later time. So we've done this for a number of patients already in the preliminary study before this current one. And so at 3 months, study patients describe fewer headaches, decreased headache severity. The implant is not visible from the outside world, certainly not with hair. I suppose if you had no hair, if you were shaved your head, you'd see a little contour, really a small little contour, but you would be able to see the contour of the battery itself. But with hair, you will certainly not see it, and you won't see the electrodes under the skin above your eyes either. They're so tiny that there's enough tissue there that you just don't see it. And then we study the quality of life. And the days with headaches on average in the so-called pilot study, the first study, the headache days were decreased from 19 to 8, which is very significant. That's substantially better than the original data with Botox for migraine. The days requiring medication went down from 9 to 4, and the days with a very severe variant of the headache went from 9 to 3 in the population of individuals that was studied in this pilot study. Just cosmetically, a lot of people are concerned about what it looks like. This patient on the right has the electrode under the skin there, but you can't see it, which is typical. And the implant in this gentleman is right here, but again with hair, it's invisible. So that's what we're looking for. And so here's the basic criteria for the study. If you're 22 or older, had migraine for at least a year, and we're looking for patients with a pretty severe variant of the headache where you have headaches 15 days a month or more, haven't had neurostimulator treatment for the headache before, and you're thinking about using Botox or CGRP medications, and you can't have had Botox in the last 6 months. That's all. Not pregnant, not breastfeeding, although we have no reason to believe that pregnancy or breastfeeding would be altered or any kind of way affected really by the neurostimulation, but it's a typical FDA rule for implanting neurostimulation electrical devices. And there are a couple other things that we would talk to you about in terms of the so-called inclusion and exclusion criteria for this study and every other one. So I've gone through a lot of information there in about 25 minutes, and but I'm very open to questions that you might have, and I'll leave it at that and open up the floor for questions.